Why many people suck at shooting. Why you suck at shooting. And I don't mean that as in you specifically, I mean the royal you. Why many people suck at shooting. This is going to be a no-holds-barred, tough love kind of episode. If you're looking for a fluffy caliber comparison, tune back and we do that another time. If you want to be a good, maybe even a great shooter, give this a listen. Things that hold you back in shooting. Maybe a more politically correct way to put it. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, the right way with God at the center, as He is in the center of my life and everything that I do. And this podcast is no different. And real-world, first-hand experience. One of the things I think that holds people back is they listen to the wrong people. Now, for a long time, I've just been saying, see the bio link in the show notes. I'm going to give a brief synopsis. So you know, if you're just tuning into this, that I've been blessed, and I'm not saying I did any of this because I'm so awesome, because God has blessed me with the talents and abilities and the opportunity to pursue them. Marine Corps combat veteran. I was also an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps. Also served in the Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard, L.A.P.D. I'm an F.B.I. certified firearms instructor. I'm another 3-letter government agency, all kinds of certifications, including advanced weapons, N.R.A. for what that's worth. It comes down to a pretty good example of knowing how to shoot. Expert rifleman in the Marine Corps, expert pistol in the Army, just different MOSs, different things. Competition shooting since a very early age. State champion in rifle, state champion in pistol a couple times over, West Coast regional champion. I've been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Also, as it pertains to hunting, I was a professional big game hunter and guide. I've hunted all over this country, been blessed to do that. Okay, with that, just a lot of people listen to the wrong people. If somebody themselves is not a very good shooter, they're probably not going to be able to teach you to be a very good shooter. And now, not everything in the gun world is about being a great shooter. You can still learn from them. But if you want to be a great shooter, you should listen to somebody with really good experience in a relevant area of what you're trying to do. This applies to more than just shooting. Like, just because somebody has a bunch of YouTube followers does not make them a great voice for how you should shoot. I'm going to anger a lot of people and say just because somebody was in the military, I'm blessed that I was in military and law enforcement, so I can kind of say this from the inside, and just because, especially because somebody was in law enforcement, does not mean that they can shoot well. As somebody that's taught a lot of military and law enforcement, instructed a lot of military and law enforcement, I was a professional firearms instructor for one of the largest firearms training academies in the country, and by that measure probably the world, where we taught military, civilian, law enforcement, and I've done that other places as well. Just because somebody is in the military or in law enforcement, especially law enforcement, that does not make them a good shooter. It does not. Just because somebody carries a gun for a long period of time does not make them a good shooter. I could walk around with a harmonica in my pocket for 20 years. Doesn't mean I know how to play the harmonica at all. Just because somebody carries something doesn't mean they're good with it. So you got to listen to the right people. That wasn't even my first bullet point. I just kind of tied in nicely. Here is another big one I think that holds a lot of people back, especially men. In shooting, you don't want to look foolish, or you're afraid to look foolish. This can manifest itself in many ways. You might be afraid to take a formal training shooting class. You're like, oh, I've been shooting since I was a kid. My uncle taught me. And you don't want to actually go out and demonstrate that you have a lot to learn. You don't want to actually go to a shooting competition and get disqualified or look ridiculous in front of a bunch of people. You got to get over that if you want to be a great shooter. You're not going to be very good compared to most competitive shooters your first shooting competition. Case in point, myself. I'll use myself as an example. I was good with a rifle by objective measures. I was a state rifle champion. I was an expert rifleman in the Marine Corps, combat veteran, and I was in law enforcement. I went through L.A.P.D, which was the longest, and I would say one of the hardest police academies in the country. I was pretty decent as far as cops went, middle of the pack as far as cops went probably. Maybe even better than that, I don't know. But let's just say middle of the pack for L.A.P.D. shooting. I went to my first handgun competition, although I had been competitive rifle shooter, because I thought if I'm going to get into a shooting, it's likely going to be with a handgun. I was crushed. I was disqualified. A little dog running away with his tail between his legs. I got disqualified in my first shooting competition. I looked a fool. That's okay. I was ignorant to what I was doing. The stuff you learn in law enforcement and a lot of times in military with a handgun is just barely scratching the surface. I was jumping into the deep end of a pool and I couldn't swim very well. I looked foolish. I got disqualified. Now, I could have done two things. I could have let that stop me because I looked stupid, looked foolish, or I could have said, you know what, I'm just going to look foolish for a while, but I'm really going to try and get better. I could have been like, oh, well, competition shooting's dumb. It's going to get you killed in the street, blah, 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 blah. But I knew deep down, especially from looking at some of those guys just at a local match, that I had a lot to learn. And if I wanted to be good, I had better be humble and I had better be willing to look foolish. You had better be willing to look foolish. And if you're not willing to look foolish in front of other people, I don't know that you can ever be a great shooter. That's part of it. And I think this affects men especially. You think that somehow through osmosis or something, because you're a man, because you have man genitalia, you popped out of your mom knowing how to run a gun. It's not true. You didn't. Don't tie it into masculinity. Masculinity is important. Let me enunciate that. Masculinity is important. Being a strong, dominant man is important. That has no correlation one-to-one as far as skill level in shooting. It just doesn't. So just because you're a man, just because you're a manly man, just because you're into guns, has nothing to do with how good you're actually going to be with a gun. Don't let pride keep you back from being a good shooter. So that's one of the big things I think holding people back is they are not willing to look foolish, and especially not willing to look foolish in front of other people. Which ties into my next point. Formal training and competition. Like a legit training class where there's pressure, where there's objective measurements, right? I have like a Western martial arts background, as in like mixed martial arts, wrestling, Marine Corps martial arts, L.A.P.D kind of mixed martial arts stuff. I don't really know much about Eastern martial arts. I think a lot of that's pagan, stupid garbage. But let's take some kind of martial arts fighting discipline. Let's say that you really want to be good at a certain discipline. Say, pick wrestling, because I know wrestling pretty well. Let's say you want to be really good at wrestling. And you get all the DVDs and you watch all the best YouTubers on wrestling. You go home and you practice all the moves by yourself. How good are you ever going to be at wrestling? That's like the guys that get a gun and they just go to the range and they shoot just by themselves, no pressure. Or maybe they shoot with a group of guys, and this would be like trying to learn wrestling, where you show up with a group of guys, but you don't wrestle each other. You just wrestle yourself and do shadow moves on the mat. Which those kind of moves are great for getting the technique down for a specific move, but you're never going to be a good wrestler unless you wrestle against somebody, unless you get into a group and you compete against each other. That is taking a formal training class and or going to a competition where there's pressure, where there's time. And if you go, this is a very, very basic class. There's a time for a very basic class. I'm talking about like firearm safety class, basic N.R.A. pistol. I'm an N.R.A. pistol instructor. There's a time and a place for that kind of class. But if you never progress beyond that, or if you go to classes beyond that where they don't have a shot timer, I'd be very leery of that. Where there's no kind of accuracy standard, I'd be pretty leery of that. There should be some kind of objective measure. Like, you need to be able to do this. This is what we're going for. You can do better than that, but like training classes, formal training classes, like where you're paying, not where like your Uncle Leroy, because he's bad, and brown, is going to teach you. Like an actual legit instructor. And going back to the first point we made, an instructor with relevant experience. Just basic pistol safety, okay. If it's just like bullseye shooting, okay, they can have that relevant experience. If it's a bench stress shooting, then somebody that just shoots off a bench is great. but it needs to be relevant to your thing. If you're going for a combat fighting type application, somebody with relevant experience in that. And we've been blessed that, I'm not saying that it was a great thing that we had a 20-year war, global war on terror. But what I'm saying is, since we had it, you might as well glean from it. And one of the gleanings you can get from that is we have a lot of combat-hardened people out there. If you want to learn combat skills from people that have combat experience and have real-world warfighting experience, you have access to that now, which in times past, that wasn't always the case. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. Now was one of those good times. But one of the things possibly holding you back is the fact that you don't go to actual competitions or you don't go to actual formal training classes. And or you're not training realistically, like going and shooting off a bench. Going and shooting off a bench for a rifle is great if your end goal is shooting good off a bench. If your end goal is bench rest shooting, one of these new in vogue, look at all my fancy widget spinners for men. Widget spinner? I think it's fidget spinners. I don't know. I don't have one. Where I can turn and dial and shoot off a ladder and do all this stuff. That's your end goal. Then do that kind of shooting. But if your goal is to shoot in what I would call practical positions, standing, shooting on the move, kneeling, sitting, prone, and not like prone with a giant rest or not standing with a giant tripod, because I've never been running around a real world situation and just, oh, look, there's a ladder out here in the middle of nowhere or a giant tripod. So get relevant experience for the relevant thing you're trying to do. How much time are you going to waste trying to shoot little tiny groups off a bench when in reality you're probably never going to shoot off a bench? So relevant training. In regards to training as well, wanting to go too fast. And this, it applies to a lot of other things, but especially in shooting. If you don't have a firm foundation, you can't build off of that foundation to more advanced stuff. Advanced shooting is like doing other stuff while still maintaining good fundamentals. You have to have good fundamentals. You have to have good marksmanship. If you're not a reasonably good handgun shooter, you're not going to become better when you have to do it really, really fast. If you're not a decent handgun shooter, you're not going to be better when you're doing it on the move. You're not going to be better under stress. That's not how that works. You have to spend the time to establish that firm foundation. Another thing I'm going to call the small pond mentality. Like, you don't do big training classes, you don't do big shooting competitions. You have like maybe a small circle of friends, and let's just say you happen to be the best or maybe not the worst of a small group of guys. And you think that it makes you a good shooter. I'll call that like the small pond mentality. Okay, let's move on here. Being closed-minded in shooting. Well, this is how I learned to shoot. And then you put a period on that. Instead of being open-minded and saying, this is how I shoot right now because it's the best way that I know right now. The this is how I shoot mentality. No, that it should be, this is how I shoot right now. If I find a better way, then I'll adopt it. I couldn't even, it would take me a long time to try and think and remember all the training classes I've been to. Even going back and taking basic classes. What is the point of me taking training, getting training, if I think I know it all? If you go to a training class, I don't care who you are, how good you are, or more importantly, how really bad you are. If you go to a training class thinking, I already know all this stuff, I'm not going to learn anything, well, you're right on the second part. You probably aren't going to learn anything because you're not willing to. But if you're open-minded, there's a lot of different stuff out there. Some techniques may work for you, some techniques may not, but if you don't try them, you're not going to know. So you have to be open-minded when it comes to shooting. Otherwise, we still have people running around shooting in a weaver stance for pistol. And this ties into that. When trying something new, you have to be willing to get worse before you get better. Not willing to get worse before you get better might be holding you back in shooting. If I have shot a certain handgun grip technique, let's say for 20 years, and there's another technique out there, and I think it has merit. If I switch over right away, I'm probably going to be worse, even if the technique itself is better. If I want to be better than I was before at that plateau, I have to be willing to get a little bit worse before I can get better. And I think a lot of people aren't willing to do that. That can certainly hold people back. All right, guys, we have hammered this quite a bit. I think I'll turn this into a multi-part series. I like to keep these fairly short, especially for something like this where I may strike a nerve. And I do it out of love, right? If you want to get better, you should be willing to take a long, hard look and be circumspect and be willing to look at yourself and think, oh yeah, I could do better in this area. But I think it may be best to split this up into a multi-part series. If you enjoyed this, then make sure you're subscribed so you can get the next one. I usually do a tactical tip, tactical verse of the day. Not usually, but I often do. Let's put it that way. This one, I'm going to do a little bit different. I'm going to tell you, if you're not familiar with it, about the story of David. David, as you might know, slays Goliath. But when he goes to King Saul and he's trying to convince him to let him go after David, King Saul's kind of skeptical. He's like, you're just basically, in today's vernacular, just a baby. You're just a boy. And he says, I've killed lion and bear. He's good with weapons. He knows how to use weapons. He's trained in that. He didn't just go into the arena with a sling that he had never tested and with a technique that he had never used. He was well trained. He was well regulated. So that's something to think about. Thanks, guys, and have a blessed day.